Hello, everyone. Um, Thank you for joining us for the Q&A after our film block number 6. I hope that you all enjoyed the films that were screened. I'm going to go ahead inviting some of the filmmakers on stage to say hello. And if you have any questions for our filmmakers at any given point, if you navigate over to the right-hand column, there's a Q&A section. Just go ahead and type in your questions for our filmmakers. And we will get to the questions as soon as I'm finished with my round of questions that I have for them. So I'm going to invite the filmmakers up one by one. First, let's go ahead and invite Jordy up to the stage. Jordy, come on down. Hello.
Hello. I promise it's connecting. Oh, there we go.
Jordy, you have the coolest camera. I feel like, it blurs out that background. You have a very nice setup.
I'm trying to walk the walk.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about yourself and about your film.
Sure. So I'm a writer and director. I'm based in Los Angeles. I have a production company that's called Marching Penguin. We've been in business since 2012. Most of what we've done to date has been commercial work. The past couple of years, we started to get into narrative, largely because I wanted to get into narrative. We released our first feature film this summer, actually. It's called 5 Years Apart. It stars Chloe Bennett, Ali Maki, Michael Blamas, and a few other named TV actors. So that was kind of a milestone for us. And Founder was another kind of effort to push further into the narrative space. It was a proof of concept that we did last year, something that we're hoping to make into a feature film. It's, as anyone that saw it, it's a coming of age story of a Asian American female entrepreneur in Silicon Valley. It's a story about being an outsider, I think, on multiple fronts. As a woman, as I think a lot of people know in Silicon Valley, men far outweigh women. I think it's a ratio of 5 or 6 to 1, which is ridiculous. We obviously need to change that. And then obviously being an outsider as an Asian American, which is the piece that I can relate to a little bit more. I grew up in Ohio, parents from 2 different foreign countries, so I definitely always felt like an outsider. So I thought it was a really unique opportunity to tell the story against the backdrop of Silicon Valley, which I don't think has really been done properly yet. I do think when Aaron Sorkin did The Social Network, that he kind of touched upon some of the grittiness of Silicon Valley, but that was really a story about Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook and less about Silicon Valley. So I think there's still a lot of room to grow into that and tell that story and see what we can explore in that part of corporate America.
I love what you said in your pitch video. It's a peek under the hood.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's a very great visual. Great. So thank you so much. I'm also going to be inviting up to the stage Lucinda. So Lucinda, come on up to the stage, please.
Hi, can you hear us?
Yes. Hello, Lucinda and Jerry. Go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your film.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Christina and Geordie. Great to hear about your film. So my name's Lucinda Horrocks. I'm a producer with a company called Wind and Sky Productions. And I'm joined by Jerry Demo, who's the director and producer of the film Data Democracy, which we both produced. It's a documentary. We're based in Australia. It's Sunday afternoon for us here, and it's summer. It's warm. We live in a town called Ballarat, which is in the southeastern part of the smallish region town. We're located here and make short documentary films, mainly for online audiences. We've been going as a company for about 10 years and love stories. 13, but who's we love trying to tell complex stories and brings those to the screen, which we love, but is also really challenging. Film Data Democracy is about the challenges of and the opportunities in being able to share data in a more efficient way, so that we could solve some of the really pressing public problems that we all face, like how to get better medical care, how to think about the environment and monitor what's going on, so we can sort out climate, how we can get our road networks across nations working better. So it's sort of the nuts and bolts of data that the Internet of Things provides a lot of opportunity for us to start collecting and monitoring data. And there's a massive amount of data out there, but what are we doing with it? Counterbalancing that with the fear that we all have about what happens when that data is there and people can use it to surveil, to watch what we're doing. So the idea of data democracy is, we've got to have human rules about how to do that. We've got to figure out things to do with rights and access and who gets to share it under what conditions. So that's what the film Data Democracy is about. And Jerry might want to add something too.
I think one of the most untapped areas is the privatisation of data. The most, which was in Australia and many countries around the world. I know the US has got the same focus. Australia has consistently sold government bodies since the 50s, and all of that data and information, which dates back a couple of hundred years in our country, 250 years, has gone into private hands, and a lot of it is destroyed because it isn't profitable to keep that data. And so a lot of the material that's sitting there is actually disappearing, being privatised. And I thought that was a really interesting area that I heard spoken of much. So from my perspective, that was something I learned the film.
Great. So let's speak a little bit about these films. Specifically, what gave you both the inspiration to make a movie specifically about these topics? So for Lucinda and Jerry, why did you decide to make this documentary about data? Did something happen in your life that you observed that was going on? What was the inspiration behind it?
Well, we were approached by a research organisation at a local university, which is called Federation University, and they have a research unit called the Centre for E-Research and Digital. And Peter Dalhouse was one of the key subjects in our film. Is a proponent and researcher of data democracy. He said to us, "Hey, do you think there's a story in this? Would you like to make a film about it?" So they actually commissioned us to, which was great. Always good to have
other people paying for things. It's great.
Right. They know that we're independent filmmakers, so they gave us complete editorial control and independent control in the creative process, which is really important too. And yeah, so then the challenge was, well, what are the themes in the story? Because as you're aware, academic researchers are very fixated on their own area of interest, but how could we tell this in a broader sense that was more, that a wider audience could appreciate? And that was tough. That was
Yeah. A lot of that work. I have a tech background, so.
Oh, you have a tech background. Okay, that makes a lot more sense too.
For 15, and a designer, systems designer. So I understand the technology. So it was trying to translate that into a language that general people can understand. Because everybody speaks in acronyms, and haven't got a clue what anybody. Most people have no idea. I always think it's like a duck quacking when technologists speak, and everybody shuts down because after the first few minutes, it's just acronyms or complete gobbledygook, as we call it. So, yeah, a lot of the work was just trying to persuade people to not speak in acronyms and try and explain things to us in terms that general people can understand. I think tough ask.
And Jordy, welcome back. Jordy, how about you? What gave you the inspiration to write specifically about Silicon Valley?
I think it was multiple things. You know, on the commercial side, we actually work with a lot of tech companies. So, you know, that's been an interesting experience. Here, we've worked with Facebook and LinkedIn, and we frequently are in the Bay Area, either filming or working on projects. I was actually there earlier this week working on a documentary for related to Tesla. So it's a world that we're familiar with. I'm a technophile, so I kind of love, you know, the technology piece of it. But I also think, you know, I've had friends who are in the industry, have colleagues who are in it, and it's a fascinating world how business gets done in Silicon Valley. It's not your traditional corporate business. It's not all boardrooms. It's Patagonia vests, and it's, you know, oftentimes it's at people's houses. And, you know, the concept of I don't know if people know what a home office is, but, you know, I always thought it was just the second bedroom that you use to set up your computer, but it's actually, you know, has a financial significance, a home office. And, you know, I actually had a chance to sit in, this was after we did the proof of concept, but sit in on a pitch. It was between a VC, it was a family office that had about, I think, 600 million that they were, you know, it's not a huge family office, but quite a bit of money that they had to invest. And it was a Chinese company that had some ties to some pretty big auto companies. But the pitch was literally just in a living room. You know, it was just like massive amounts of money potentially changing hands. And it just seemed like a bunch of very normal people, obviously very smart people. And, you know, there were some interesting facets to that conversation. So to me, that fascinates me, that business gets done in those ways. And then, you know, founder touches upon it, but there's less, you know, kind ways that business gets done, obviously, as well, in terms of excluding people and there being a boys club and any kind of exclusionary club. So, you know, I think that was something that interested me and continues to interest me.
So, Jordy, how did you become a filmmaker? How did this happen? How did you start your production company, and where did it all start from?
Yeah, it's been a painful process. I think actually coming from, you know, so my father's Japanese, and I think true to the stereotype, it's a very traditional sort of mindset in terms of you have to have a strong career, you shouldn't mess around, stability is of paramount importance. So I think the idea of being a filmmaker always scared me, as if I would disappoint my family and my dad. That's quite the opposite. I mean, if you know my family, they're very supportive, and they've been nothing but supportive throughout my life. But because of that, I started my career a little bit more so in a stable world. So I was before doing this in consulting, but I was always like moonlighting. You know, I was doing shorts on the side. I was taking directing classes. I was trying to find a way in, and it was around the transition, you know, when 2008, when everything kind of hit with the economy, kind of similar to what we're going through now, with everything just being kind of crazy with the economy and people losing jobs and companies going under, that I was able to kind of transition out of consulting into advertising, which brought me a step closer. But it still wasn't creative enough. And so a couple of years later, I ended up moving on and starting my own company. And at the time, I really didn't know anything about production. You know, I was just pitching clients and hoping that we would get clients, and managed to get lucky a few times and just kept building, you know.
Great. And Lucinda, same question for you and Jerry. How did you guys end up filmmakers and making films and getting connected to this world?
Oh, that's a really good question. We're life partners as well as business partners. So
Oh, that's great.
13 years ago, we decided that we wanted to do something more creative with both our lives, and that's when we took the step to form our company, Wind and Sky Productions.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of soul searching to figure out what embracing creativity meant. Documentary film just sort of eased its way up there into the list of, oh yeah, that actually, that's what we want to do. We want to have this sort of curiosity and storytelling approach to the world. So that's why we decided. What was the second part of your question?
Just how did you guys enter into this filmmaking world and just kind of, you know, get established? And
Yes, that I don't know whether we are. I think we might be. So, yeah, we looked at the established filmmaking world and decided that was going to be too tough to get into. There's age restrictions on that sort of thing. You need about 30 years of sleeping on floors and going to film festivals to crack the industry. I didn't have that long left, so I thought, let's do something else instead. Let's just use the web and work from that perspective and look for new ways to enter into filmmaking, make films without entering into the normal television stream, broadcast stream, and theatre stream. So we looked at doing that, and we spent a lot of time actually showing our films as well. We were actually in a major city when we first started. We were in Melbourne before we had a tree change, as we call it here. We came to hide in the country where it was a lot cheaper to live.
yeah.
And living in Melbourne, we started actually touring our films all over the place, and we started touring our films out into the country, and we were going to small halls and showing our films to people and taking guest speakers. We still do that. We take musicians with us and play the music from the film. We do all sorts of screenings. We do things. We've done everything from show films to 2,000 people in a theatre in Melbourne to in a tent, literally in a tent.
Oh my gosh.
Next to a lake, you know. We did some film about Indigenous people in Australia, and we were showing those at a festival in a tent, and do 5 people and a dog, and so we do all of that sort of thing to get audiences, and we get it, and we fund the films by getting partnerships, lots of partnerships, and then looking for the funding from anywhere we can get it, essentially. So that's we scrape it together to make the film. But most of the time we make people will come to us with story ideas, or they'll come to us with a starting point, and we work from there.
So let's talk actually about some projects that you all have worked on before in the past. So Jordy, Founder, you're working on Founder right now, and you are in advertising, or you were in advertising, and now you're doing more commercials. But what other films have you made besides Founder?
So we earlier this year we produced we released 5 Years Apart. Mm-hmm. So it's a story of 2 brothers born 5 years apart on the same day, and they basically descend on their families or their parents' home unexpectedly on their birthday, and all hell breaks loose. So it's kind of a fun, feel-good dramedy for anyone that's had a sibling, just to kind of see, what that falling out story is and reconciliation. We had a really strong TV cast, so Chloe Bennett, if you're familiar with her from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Ali Maki from TBS's Wrecked, Michael Vlamis from CW's Roswell, and Scott Michael Foster. I can't leave him out. He's great. So basically our main component to that was we ran all the post on the film, and I was an executive producer on it as well. So that I think that was a great experience. Take something that was a very indie film and bring it to market. Obviously learned a lot. I think that's what is driving the thought that we can succeed with something like Founder. So yeah, that was kind of, and from a narrative standpoint, that's really it. Like, it's been largely commercial projects that we've worked on.
So Founder was kind of like your debut, your directorial debut.
From a narrative standpoint, yeah, it's like,
oh wow,
kind of being a baby. Yeah, so it was like, and I think you kind of hit the nail on the head in terms of the nuance of what you're saying, because we had this discussion with close friends and other producers that I know, that people wouldn't care how many credits I had, how many big brands I'd worked with, what kind of cool stuff I'd done. Really needed to start showing narrative work and the ability to do that storytelling. And, to be honest and humble about it, just, it is different. I think skill sets are very similar. Like, filmmaking is filmmaking, but you do have to kind of brush off the rust and start thinking about things a little bit differently than, when you're used to telling stories in condensed 30 or 60-second time frame. It's a lot different, so I think even some close friends that watched, that are in the industry, that watched Founder, initially were like, this feels too polished, it's like a commercial almost, so I think some of that tendency seeped in to kind of bottle something into 60 seconds, but hopefully I'll let go of that as time moves on.
And Lucinda and Jerry, what other projects have you guys worked on besides Data Democracy?
You went a bit crunchy in the audio there, but you're asking our other projects.
Yes.
Well, Data Democracy is a few years old now, but at the time, I think that was one of the longest, because that goes for 13 minutes, so it was quite long for us.
20 minutes is the
yes.
thing. We've made 30 films, so I'm just thinking of a subject. So yeah, we've done really different sorts of films. We've made films, done a lot of history work, great deal of history work. Lucinda has an enormous interest in history, and her background is in research, so that's very, very helpful. For instance, we made a film about the origins of the changes of law in Melbourne gay movement from the 70s, which was lots of fun, with lots of really good 70s music, and some very funny people who were at the original marches and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
The people that started, we have a very similar thing to the Greenwich Village marches in Sydney, which started in Sydney. The people that started that, which was great, and they're all in their 70s and things, and you just wanted to go out and protest something immediately after you met them because they hadn't changed a bit. And so, we get to meet those sort of people. We've made things on the history of Indigenous people in Australia who had a similar bloody destruction as the American Indians have had, the Native Americans. So things on their life in the goldfields, which is where we live. We live in like California. We've got massive goldfields around us.
Wow.
There's lots of to and fro between California and our area. A lot of people went to California after they left here.
Is it the other way around?
Or vice versa.
Yeah. Gold Rush towns.
We're all gold rush towns. So we've done a lot of work around that. What else is interesting?
One of our most recent films, which we were going to tour it around the country, but of course COVID has cut short all of that. 2020 has just been a year where no face-to-face events at all. But our most recent film is it's called The Missing, and it's about the First World War in Australia, taking the point of view of just the impact of the mass of death, because it was the first time really, certainly for our country, where just this overwhelming wash of destruction, death, people, dead bodies, and it was a terrible shock to families at the time to sort of send their soldier son overseas, and then to get this sort of note from the military saying, well, he's missing in action. What does that mean? They had no concept that meant that the body was blown to bits, and that happened en masse. So it was a story about a couple of really interesting volunteer movements happened in Australia to try and help families deal with that grief. And one was a detective agency run by women set up as part of the Red Cross, and they tried to track down every single missing person and write a letter back to every family. And that happened across the world, not just in Australia. So it's a really sad but lovely story.
The second group within that were the people that went up and reconstituted all of the bodies. And so they went into the field and they put the bodies back together again.
Oh my gosh.
Found them all. Started re-digging them up and re-burying them. And from that came the Red Cross's entire movement now in war-torn countries and also in disaster areas. So from that became the Red Cross movement that goes into countries finding bodies in earthquakes and wherever people are lost. And so there were hundreds and thousands of people. The French farmers were still finding bodies in the 50s and 60s in their fields when they were ploughing. They still find bodies in the field.
Oh my gosh!
It was a very dark tale. Many of them didn't make it. Many of the people that were in the burial details didn't make it into their 30s. They suicided, or they had major issues when they came back to Australia and back to their home countries, because there was a Canadian movement as well, and a Polish one and several others. So a very interesting and dark tale.
Yeah. So that we made a film that's online. If you go to our website, windsky.com.au, you can see the short film. But I think as you see, as we're talking, we're like, there's larger stories. We always want to go back and revisit and make and tell more. So maybe that's what we'll pitch next year, as we'll say, help us tell more.
Do you guys primarily just make documentaries, or do you guys ever do any narratives? You guys just do documentaries, and it's pretty much just on subjects that you guys are interested in. And I mean, hearing about some of like the past documentaries that you guys have created, those are all topics that you guys are interested in. So it seems like there's a theme, like history that's largely untold, right? But shocking, right?
Well, people come to us and we hear stories, but usually we'll look for. I mean, essentially we have to follow the money, and we make a living out of this, so we have to tell stories that people essentially want to pay us to make, or that we can find funding to make. So we seek out the funding. We have thousands of stories, ideas. And we're always looking for funding, and when we see funding, we think, that story would actually fit this funding, and we put the two things together.
Oh, so you make stories around funding.
Pretty well,
we can,
because there's so many stories, and so many people tell us things that they want to have made. We're never in short supply of stories, but no, short supply of money, yes. So being able to make out of this is quite ridiculous. Not many people manage to do it. So we're always scratching and looking around for ways that we can fund different films or with other people. And often it's through partnerships. So, we'll put together a pretty major partnership with big groups like the Red Cross and universities and government organisations and museums. We do a lot of work. We'll go to museums and bring together a group of 5 museums and all go for the funding together. We'll go with a national park body, and we'll get a national park body to come in as a partner with us, because there's only the 2 of us, and so when we go for funding, it doesn't, we don't. It's a lot harder for us to get funding than it is for a national park body. So we find relationships to do that, and then we tell the stories through that. And the good news is we're interested in. I mean, everything interests me. So I just find life interesting, and I find things that people do interesting. So mostly if someone puts a subject in front of me, I'm straight into it, trying to think about how I'd make a story out of it. So I don't have any. I never have any problem. I don't bore easily. So
It looks like we have a hand raised in the audience. I've never seen that before. I've always seen like questions, but I've never seen a hand raised. Matthew, do you have a question? In the queue? Let's see. Okay, so we actually have a couple questions from the audience. First, let's figure out why Matthew was raising his hand. Matthew, I'm going to bring you up to the stage. We're going to see, we'll get to the bottom of this raised hand business. I've always seen like people asking questions, but never a hand raised. Hi.
Hi. May I go to the bathroom? I'm just kidding.
Here's your hall pass.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I have a bunch of questions down there, and you can read them off too, because they're for both Jordy and Lucinda. But I have a question for Jordy real quick. As a Japanese filmmaker, how are you finding let's say I should say Hollywood or the industry? How are they receiving Japanese filmmakers right now and material with Japanese Americans? You know, because my friend Marlene Shigakawa, she's one of my best friends. She was born in Poston back in 1945 or 4, and she tells me about her. That we're just starting. Japanese Americans and Chinese Americans are just starting to get more representation, and African Americans, and getting more parts and more material being made. And I just wonder what your take was on that. And Christina, obviously, that question to you as well.
Jordy.
It's a big question, actually. Do you have an hour? No, I'll keep my answer short. I mean, I definitely have a lot of opinions about it, but I'll say that the short answer is it's definitely challenging. I think Asian American in general. Like, there's been so few prolific movies in Western society that have been strongly Asian American, and really I think you can count them on one hand. It's really been Joy Luck Club and Crazy Rich Asians in the past 25 years, sadly. So there's definitely a deficit, and I don't think that's because there's a deficit of talent or a deficit of desire, but there are definitely some intricacies in terms of Hollywood and how funding happens that aren't aligning. I'll say specifically to Japanese American filmmakers, it's a really tiny community here in LA, at least. It is small. The Asian American film community is very small. I think most of us know each other or have met. And I that seems like an exaggeration. It's very true in terms of, especially before COVID, networking events and industry events where we come together. So a lot of folks know each other. It's a very small world, but that the Japanese American slice of that is even smaller. I have to say, like, if you really want to beat me up about this, my dad did in particular, that the lead for Monica Sato and Founder is actually played by Olivia Sue, who's Chinese. We desperately looked for a Japanese American actress, and it was tough, to make that happen. There are very few that are pure Japanese American. So in other words, they're not Japanese but came to America and have an accent. And this role in particular is Japanese American. So I think that just represents the fact that there is a lack of diversity on that front. And like I said, I could go on, but I guess what I would say to wrap it all up, and the lesson that I've learned in the past couple of years that has been interesting, is that there is an appetite to tell these stories. And although I thought that it might come from friends who are Japanese American or who are in the Asian film community, I've realized that it's actually all over the place, and that the allies come from all walks of life. And that's heartening to me. It means that the people that I think will help, that'll be investors, that'll be co-producers or fellow filmmakers are going to be from all walks of life. And I think that's what we need moving forward. You know, we need all kinds of different stories. They don't just have to be Japanese American or Asian American, but they can be, you know, any race or religion or creed or sexual orientation or whatever needs to be told out there, because we're obviously missing stories from a lot of walks of life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing too is just you look at the strides that you know, Black Americans have made in terms of their presence. You know, like you see the awards. You know, they're being nominated for Oscars and Emmys more so than they have in the past. You know, way more than Asians, right? I feel like in that, like Asians, we still don't really have representation. Has to do with just cultural. I feel like Asians are just very quiet and we don't speak up and we don't stand up for ourselves a lot of time, you know? And so the thing is, I think we really need to be more aggressive, to be honest. We need to like stand up for ourselves, and we need to kind of put the stake in the ground. And so the thing is, I think that another aspect, you know, to tell these Asian stories is just being like Tyler Perry. You know, what Tyler Perry has done for the Black community. I feel like we need more Asian Tyler Perrys, you know, who are, you know, going and making their like big, you know, like studios and just making their own content and constantly like churning out content. I think that's like the big thing. It's like, I feel like if the content, you know, gets made, you know, of course, obviously it has to be funded, but it's like if the content just gets consistently made, I feel like there will be an audience. Like if I'm, you know, on social media, like on Facebook specifically, they have this like group called the Asian Creative Network. And it's just like, it has like thousands and thousands, like tens and thousands of people on there, you know? And it's just like, I feel like they're so hungry for this, you know, for, you know, media, you know, movies and, you know, that have, you know, Asians as the lead. And so, you know, it's like you think about like Crazy Rich Asians, like that's why like so many people watched that film when it came out. Like The Farewell, you know, like that's why that, you know, that's another one where, you know, I know a ton of like people within like the Asian film community, they like flock to that. So it's just like, I feel like the content just needs to be made. And I feel like people just need to, you know, they need to just do it. They need to maybe get scrappy and, you know, just because that's the thing. It's like with filmmaking, it's like just, you know, I think that a lot of, and, you know, this is another thing too. I think with Asians are like perfectionists, you know, I don't know what it is, but there's like that aspect. And because they're perfectionists, it's like they're not churning out as much content, you know, than, you know, I guess like non-Asians. So,
well, is there something also within the Asian culture that you feel that you can tell other ethnicities stories? You know what I'm saying? I mean, meaning other than non-Asian, you know, like it seems like white and black. Okay. Because I mean, Ang Lee is making, you know, he directed Brokeback Mountain and he directed, but he also directed Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, The Wedding Banquet. I think it's The Wedding Banquet, you know. Was he one of your was he a crossover? He was a crossover director, and is he helping young filmmakers as well?
I can't speak too much to Ang Lee because I don't know too much about him, but Jordy.
Yeah, I mean, I know enough to be dangerous about Ang Lee, but I guess the essence of your question, and at least what drives me, is the idea that I want to tell stories about Asian Americans, and that tends to be a little bit controversial. And not just Asian Americans. I actually want to tell, you know, I'm half technically, so my mom would, if she was listening to this, would probably get on my case. I want to tell stories about people from different walks of life, but when it comes to Asian Americans, you know, there's a lot of filmmakers here, especially in Los Angeles, that are Asians who came to America, and they're not Asian Americans, and their stories are very different, and they should be told, and they're amazing stories. I actually think those are the ones that are getting made the most and that are most funded. I want to tell stories about, a kid like me that grew up in Ohio at a high school that was 98% white, and what my experience was like, because I think there's a lot of other kids like that in the country that could relate to that. And I also think that story is relatable to other races and religions. It could be a Jewish kid growing up in a totally like Christian, community. It could be a lot of things. So I think that's what's interesting about it to me. It's like, and at the end of the day, we're all like, of the similar nationality, right? So that's kind of the tie that binds.
Great. Thank you so much for your question, Matthew. So it looks like Meredith, I'm going to grab Meredith up to the stage. Meredith, I saw that you had a question. I'm going to bring you up onto the stage. Meredith, where are you? So until Meredith arrives, Jordy, what other films, like what other stories do interest you? You say the Asian American story, but I mean, right now this is an Asian American story as it relates to Silicon Valley. But what other stories are interesting to you, and what other stories do you want to tell in the future?
So I'm very much into stories about romantic relationships, actually, and not necessarily just rom-coms, but pretty much my favorite movie was Lost in Translation. And I was always fascinated by that relationship, even though it was largely platonic, the one between Bill Murray and Scarlett Johansson's characters. Those kinds of relationships I'm fascinated in exploring. I have a project that I've been writing through most of the pandemic and is close to being something that I can put out to other producers and managers, but it's basically a sci-fi romance set 5 minutes into the future. And it's about how all of dating is actually coordinated by artificial intelligence in the future. So that's an example of the kind of story that I want to tell. That's provocative and makes us think about how our relationships work.
I think this is Matthew. Matthew, raise your hand if this is your question. You said, Jordy, what would say is the goal next? What do you envision next for Founder, feature-length TV series, something else entirely? Would somebody raise their hand, whoever asked that question? Let's see. Do you see a raised hand? Oh, Meredith is back. Hi.
On the cell phone and it wouldn't let me join on the cell phone.
No, it's all right. Meredith, go ahead and ask your question.
Oh, I was just going to tell Jordy, I'm from Shaker Heights.
That's such a small world. It's funny.
I know.
I was saying her.
I love that. That was like the first thing that was like, oh my God, the little girls from Shaker Heights. That was so cool. I figured whoever made that film had to have like been from Shaker Heights.
Yeah, I was close. I grew up in Canton, Ohio, but we had a rivalry with. I played on the tennis team, and we played against Shaker Heights. So, I had to give them a nod.
Oh, and you'll have to go check out my sizzle reel when you have a chance. Melina Moy, the female Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah, absolutely.
In our sizzle reel, She Rocks the Planet. She's from Canton.
Oh, that's funny. Okay. Yeah, definitely.
We're all misplaced Ohioans out here. I loved Founder. I was texting Christina when I got in the question and answer, and I was like, I loved it. I said, are they going to do a feature? So I'm happy to hear.
Oh, good. These are your questions. Awesome. I was like, whose questions are these?
Will had all those questions. I'm like, oh, this guy really knows what he's talking about here. But I really, really loved everything. When I looked at it before I saw the credits, I watched on my cell phone too, because I was like cooking. It was actually pretty cool because I'm like one of these people. Oh, I should turn a light on here. Okay, that's better. Lighting. I wish I could walk around with the lighting. I was just looking at everything, And watching it on the cell, I was like, man, this is really professionally done. These are like SAG actors. I had no idea. Just started watching it, and then when it ended, I was bummed. I was seriously bummed because I wanted to know more about these characters. I wanted it to continue, and so I'm watching all the credits, and I'm like, I see the SAG after, and I'm like, okay, yeah, this definitely has legs. This should go somewhere. So anyway, I loved it. I just thought you did such a great job.
That's very kind of you, very sweet of you. I appreciate that a lot.
Thank you
Absolutely.
so much, Meredith, for that.
Yeah,
So I see
that's so kind.
Matthew with his hand raised, so I'm going to go ahead and bring him back up to the stage.
Eat. I'm kidding. I have a question. I have one question for Jordy, and I had like two that are wrapped for Lucinda. It was a statement for Jordy. I really like Jordy how you the end, the female stuck up for the other female, because I know a lot that doesn't really happen a lot in life. I mean, from what my female friends always like, they're always competitive with each other, and we don't see that a lot represented in film, I should say. So I really I thought that was really well done, and thank you for that. Lucinda, I have a question for you. In your research, like here in the US, what can we do to protect our data? Is there nothing we can do? And do governments here, like the older generation, like the Nancy Pelosi's here in Congress, or when they were grilling Facebook about a year and a half ago or whatever, they didn't really understand. The senators here or the Congress people didn't really understand what they were talking about. Is that the same way around the whole world? And if not, which government has got their head wrapped around data protection?
Oh, that's a good question, and I wish we had one of our experts from our film Data Democracy to answer that for you, Matthew. George Bong, who's in our film, would be a perfect person to answer that. I don't know if he's still in the audience, because I struggle with that. That's exactly the questions that we're trying to figure out ourselves. I think the US and Australia, if anything, the US is more ahead than Australia, because I mean, you sort of invented the data revolution, right? Or like Silicon Valley, you're the engine of all of this happening. But I think the thing that fascinates me about this whole issue is that it's really at the base of it, it's about a problem or a wicked challenge about people connecting and sorting out who has power, who has the right to use whatever resource, in this case data. It's not about technology. The technology will let us do, it'll let us suck it all up through our mobile devices and put it over there. But the challenge is the political one, isn't it? It's about people. And by politics, I mean it's about people negotiating with other people about how, what rights do you have over my data? And I guess alongside that comes data literacy, which is educating us all on what data we have and signing away our rights to Facebook or Twitter or whatever social media platform that has a really appealing benefit of allowing us to share things with our friends. What are the downsides of that? What are we signing away in those terms and conditions agreements that we never read? Is that what you would? What would you add anything to that, Sharon?
No, only that one of the great arguments that happened here, which would be of interest to whether or not government understood what was going on, was there was a great deal of consternation about the term metadata a couple of years ago with our government.
Yes.
And it really showed that they had absolutely no idea what they were talking about, because they didn't know what metadata was. And so that was telling in itself. the same sort of arguments that you're having in the US, where the sways from one side or the other in your Senate and House on control, some sort of control over the internet, or corporate control over the internet, or whatever it is that they're doing. It's such a complex issue. It is a great pity that George Fong wasn't here, because he advises government here and works very hard to do that. And also he's Chinese English.
Australian.
He's English and Chinese. He was a lawyer and he used to arrest ships, which is a really interesting job to have in Malaysia. So he's a very interesting man to talk to. He really knows his stuff. And he started one of the first ISPs in Australia back in the 80s, and ran an ISP for many years. And he's incredible to talk to, and we'd love to have him on more. And if you watch the film, you'll see him there. He spends a lot of time fighting with governments to get them to understand what's going on, and also for regional communities to the same in this. You probably don't have the same sort of issues in the States. We've got better rollout than we do, but the speed of the internet here in regional areas is worrisome. Sometimes it will shut down for there's been cases of whole towns being shut down for a fortnight.
Oh wow! Oh my gosh!
That's
crazy.
So it's nowhere near as bad as a lot of countries in the world, but because we're such a large continent and with such a small population, it's very expensive to roll out cabling. It's just, and a lot of the remoter areas are all satellite based, and so it's very disparate here between regional communities and city communities. So you don't understand how slow things are. And so that makes so much difference in a competitive world. So there's all those sorts of things going on here in Australia that we contend with because of the tyranny of distance. Because we are we're a very remote continent in many ways, especially south. So Perth, our coast, is the most isolated capital city in the world. So you don't sort of picture it like that, but that's what Australia is like. That it's a very we're pretty far from everywhere, but we're right in the middle of things as well. So it's a strange place.
Are your documentaries on a website that we can view? Because I would really love to see that one on the LGBTQ movement in Australia. I've never seen gay history in Australia except for Priscilla, Queen of the Desert.
Yeah,
which is a fantastic film. Thank you.
It is.
We do all of our films Creative Commons.
Yes.
And so everything we make's on our website.
What is it called?
windsky.com.au. Windsky, all one word. Also, there's one there which would be of interest, which is one we've made on the
windsky.com.au.
Yeah, windsky.com.au. Also, there, have a look for Many Roads, which is about the Chinese community here in Australia during the gold rush, which was a very untold story of the Chinese experience, the many people that came to Australia and then went back to China with their fortune.
Oh wow!
Or not.
I really resonated with Geordie's and Christina's story about Asian American stories. I'd love to hear those stories that you guys are talking about, and I wonder if you've looked into the history of San Francisco, because I think there's a similar thing happened in the US that Chinese in particular came and founded lives, and some went back, but some stayed and naturalized. And certainly in Australia, it was kind of pushed under the carpet. We had this thing called the White Australia policy, which is a really horrible part of our history. And essentially we just made a national decision to stop telling stories about any other cultures, even though they were relevant. They were relevant to our national story.
That's interesting.
So Chinese Australians who'd been, generations had been here living productive lives, they felt like they had to ignore their heritage. So we have people in Australia today whose grandparents were of Chinese ancestry and sort of weren't ever allowed to tell. And so it's nice that we got to unveil some of those stories and talk to some people who kept hold of that heritage, kept it going. So I'd really love to hear, Geordie, your next story about. I want the 5-minute science fiction story, please.
Yeah, just quickly do that.
Yeah, I'll get it made. I'll have it to you tomorrow. But you guys got to make a documentary and return by Monday, okay? So, yeah, next one.
So you know what? Speaking of these like films and these documentaries, like a question that I had, and Matthew, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put you back. So Geordie and Lucinda and Jerry, actually, a question that I have about the process is, Geordie, you were talking about casting these actresses, these big actors, these name actresses and actors who've been on TV shows, and you being just getting started with the narrative world. How did you find these actors and actresses for your projects?
So, some of them came through the film that we released this year, through 5 Years Apart. So that was, we were kind of fortunate. I think it was very organic. So we finished that film and I logically went to a couple of those actors and said, so in particular, Craig Lowe, who plays the, no offense to you guys, the sleazy Australian, but Craig Lowe plays the sleazy Australian, and then Michael Lamas, who was Alex. Both of those guys were in 5 Years Apart, so that helped. Olivia, we kind of actually just stumbled onto her. Olivia is actually quite big in the social media world. She grew up on YouTube. I say grew up like in a career sense. So she was on Smosh TV, which is kind of the YouTube equivalent of SNL. So they do a lot of comedic type bits, and Olivia has a really big following. She has like 700,000 followers on Instagram. And it just so happened that the DP for Founder was filming a different project with her, and I saw her on Instagram filming with Dustin, and I was just like, I think she's perfect. So we just kind of, connected that way, and
through your DP.
Through our DP, yeah. So, and in fact, our DP said, I don't think she's a good fit, and I was like, let me be the judge of that, and he was like, okay, and he still connected us, and so here we are. So that that helped. And I think with Tohoru, who's actually, I think, the only true Japanese American actor in it, who played the dad, that was really just a cold outreach. I just, a friend had sort of recommended him, but like had never met him, and just kind of pitched him on the project, and it happened. So I think that's the way I've always known, which is just, introduce yourself and try and make a connection and hope that someone buys into your story, and hopefully they want to jump on the project, so.
And Lucinda and Jerry, how did you guys find these experts, that you guys interview? Like, do you guys just, do you hear about them? Like when you're making your films and your documentaries, like, are you just like, okay, we need to find an expert in this field? Do you guys just do like a search and then just like track them down, and call them up? Is that the process of getting these?
Pretty well.
Yeah, we tend to do even though they're factual, we do a sort of pre-narrative script treatment where we identify the types of voices that we want all our stories, and those are usually people who are experts either in sense that they're very learned on the topic, or they've gone through a personal experience and then they are experts in their, you know,
Experience,
they can be
yeah.
testimony, offer the testimony. So we usually have a pretty strong idea of the sorts of voices or perspectives that we want. It's not a cast, but then we start to send out the call, look on websites, ask friends, who do you know that is an authority on X, Y, or Z. But usually, if we're starting from a personal perspective, we'll have someone who perhaps might be attached to a project that we already know about. You know, someone who's gone through an experience. But yeah, it's a bit.
Yeah, it depends a lot on the project, but yeah, we do a casting process.
Oh, you go.
The casting research.
Oh, you do go. Okay, wait. You guys don't go through a casting director or anything, right? You guys just.
No, the way that casting is actually, you know, because we need to research, what we'll often do is we do a lot of phone calls. So we'll ring a lot of experts and ask them about the story to unfold the story. So that's essentially our search for talent, if you like. As we talk to people on the phone, you get a feel for who's going to be good. Obviously, sometimes when we turn up with a camera, they freeze when they've been fantastic on the phone, because you know a lot of people are they're academics and they're usually cloistered away writing books rather than being in front of a camera. So there's a fair bit of luck of the draw when it comes to what happens.
Books is actually a way that we so books or articles, so we'll have read it.
And then you'll just look them up.
Yeah, you send an email. They're usually attached to a university or something. You say, hey, I really loved your book.
Are they responsive when you reach out to them that way? Are they like, sure, yeah, I'll get filmed?
The ones that answered are, and then there's the ones that you just never hear anything back and you just think, oh, they probably sent me straight to.
You're like, that's a no.
People publish their books as well, and we always co-support. So you know, if somebody we'll get people along with their books to our film showings, and so you know, you try and
help them.
Can I
publicity from that thing. And so it all sort of helps out from that perspective. But yeah, it's different for each. Sometimes we end up in terrible trouble where we think we've found people that know the story and they don't. You realise halfway through, and so that's a worry.
It's not good.
Because then you've got to do a lot of your own research that you know.
Emergency narration.
And the deadline's coming and the money's running.
Gosh.
You're up till midnight and reading every book that you can find. And Lucinda and I are both perfectionists too, despite our
non-Asianness.
And Lucinda can't stop reading, and I don't know when to stop fiddling with the edit. So, you know, between us, we muddle our way through, but both of us have that issue where, the deadline decides when the film's finished, most other than us being completely happy with the end result, as it were.
It's so funny. I'm Asian and I don't think I'm a perfectionist at all. I'm just like, that's good enough. But I feel like I'm kind of like the anomaly.
I don't buy that. I don't buy that. You're having a day job. You're running a film festival. I'm not buying it. Yeah.
I'm just kind of like, I just go with the flow with everything. Like, it works or it doesn't. Jordan, are you a perfectionist? I feel like you are.
Yeah, I'm definitely a perfectionist, for better or worse. Yeah.
I mean, your background's like blurred out. You are totally a perfectionist.
Yeah.
Your screen looks perfect.
Try.
I have laundry behind me.
Love it. Can I ask? I just wanted to ask a question, actually, for you guys on the documentary side, because we're, as a company, we're doing our first feature documentary. We're in the middle of it, and the interesting thing for me as a filmmaker is, we're with our producer. I'm having this debate right now, which is, how do we decide whether or not to go down a certain rabbit hole, because it's a lot of resources, it's a lot of time. And that's kind of the interesting part of the process, which I'm sure you guys are intimately familiar with, is you kind of have this thesis, or you guys called it like a treatment, and you start going down the gauntlet, and you have these phone calls and these interviews, and you're learning, and the story is kind of like evolving, and it's this living, breathing thing. But then something kind of happens, which is what's happened to us on a recent shoot. We're like, wait, we didn't even think about going in this direction. And the problem is, if we go down this direction, it could be 2-3 months, and it could be all for nothing. It could blow up the project. It's very different from narrative. So yeah, I'm curious how you guys think about saying yes or no, like how do you make that decision?
Yeah. I direct the film, so many arguments come from, I'm both producer and director, Lucinda's producer, but together we run the company. So there's plenty of arguments about where to go. But Lucinda essentially writes a story. One of the things that we've found, and this is our process, because we don't tend to do fly on the wall style documentary because we've never got enough money to. I think you've got to really have a love project or a lot of money to do those. And so we choose our style based on what is financially viable to us. And so the structure of the way we do things and what we've learnt over time is that we write the story first as a journal article. And so we'll go out interviewing lots of, Lucinda goes out interviewing lots of people. She also looks for content. So we might work a lot with existing content or stills, or be scouting to see where we might shoot and that sort of thing, to keep our costs down so that we're not out shooting and then suddenly find halfway through the film that we've made the wrong film. And so what we'll do is we'll actually write a journal article and not a treatment per se. We don't usually start with a treatment, although film funding requires you to. We don't go in that route. We write it as if it's going to be a written story. Lucinda will write that story so that we've nailed what the story is. And we'll often then put that story out to experts, and we'll put it out to people and ask them whether that's the story. And they'll give us other little bits and pieces. And that's where we find what Geordie's talking about. We go, wow, hang on. There's this other complete other stream that we didn't know about. But at that point, we haven't shot a thing.
Yeah.
We haven't even collected anything. All we've done is we call it the pencil and paper, and also the fluffy stage, because everything's just in complete flux, and we have to be really comfortable with that. And it's quite panic producing, because especially when you're getting down to the wire and you think we don't actually have a story, which you'll often, Lucinda hears me say a lot.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a story here. We're in a lot of trouble. And then generally, after grumbling for a bit, we'll actually find it. But I think that writing the story first as a prose helps us enormously, because you can really think about then how do you turn that into a film now? And so then we'll do a treatment. So in many ways, Lucinda's sort of writing an abridged book. And that helps me enormously, because then I read that abridged book and then I start to think about all the shots and how I might bring that together with the available imagery and content, and what we can afford in that.
Yeah.
What music and how we'll approach it, and what the style will be, what style lends itself most to that story. And often we can't afford to do the style that we think would be the best, and so we have to think of something else, because as you know, with the narrative style, blowing up the helicopter is just not in the budget.
I think also what Geordie's talking about is that that's the fun of documentary too, because you essentially, you are a slave to the story, but the story is not sorted out until that final edit is made. So as long as you've got a real strong sense of what the themes are that you want to cover, or the questions or the emotional journey that you're trying to get through it, if you've got the budget, it doesn't matter if you go down a rabbit hole, as long as you think there's going to be something that'll be able to keep your audience engaged with the story that you're telling. But it is a challenge if you've got a new kind of the you're going to send the train on a completely different track. That's a hard decision point to come up to. But you're always interrogating it the whole way because you don't have a script. It's not like drama. So you're writing the script every time you're at the next point of production. So and it's not, a script in the terms of a dramatic script. It's a script in terms of a guide. What's our story now? So it's very valid to kind of stop and say, okay, we've got this new option. What's our story now? and rethink. You've just got to do it within a way that's reasonable within your budget and resources.
Well, Jordy, I want to say, I think you should go down the rabbit hole. I really do. Because I honestly think like some of my favorite documentaries are when the filmmakers go down the rabbit hole. And, like an example would be Born into Brothels. I don't know if anybody has seen that, but, it's about, the children that were born into, the brothels of the red light district in Calcutta. And it's just like the filmmaker, originally had this plan that wasn't going to go, that wasn't going to show that. And, it's just like there's another documentary called Invisible Children where it's like I actually know those filmmakers. They went to USC with me, and they just went down to Africa just with their camera, just thinking that they were going to just just go to some villages, and it just like, and they ended up finding these like tiny child, like these child soldiers, and so it's just like it's like I just feel like, yes, money and all that stuff, but I just feel like if you end up finding yourself at a rabbit hole, I feel like how can you not go down it? You have to at least explore it and go down it, and be open and see what you may find, because I feel like that's maybe you're uncovering something, deeper than, so I love what you said, Lucinda. It's like it writes itself as you're making it, and I think that that's why documentaries are just so interesting,
Guys, hi.
Oh, hi. Why, hello.
Just pop in here. I was overhearing what you guys were talking about, and I just wanted to say there's this thing about serendipity that I totally am seeing now after our last festival, where one of the filmmakers, so random, it's called Piano de Zanskar, and he was just looking for a piano in a piano store to photograph. And then he sparks up a conversation with the owner of the store, who apparently needs to take this 100-year-old piano to the Himalayas because, like, why does this old wooden piano need to be up there? There's a lot of musical instruments. You don't need to do this. This guy won festivals left and right with this documentary about getting this piano on top of a mountain on such a random premise. Right. But for him, it was just serendipity. It was a conversation that was meant to happen that he just got sucked in. I guess I'm filming this now. I guess I'm climbing a mountain.
Yeah.
I guess the piano really needs to be up there.
Oh,
so I just had to pop in and share that because I was listening to you guys talking about
so Phil was saying, go down the rabbit hole, Jordy. I think these are signs.
Those are the best stories. They're the
really
realest. They're the most sincere. Related note, I have another friend, another filmmaker who just got signed to a $3 million narrative feature. It's a horror film, and he's up in Canada right now filming it. And this guy is a prolific filmmaker, but he was never trained. He just picked up a camera. He was a psychotherapist for most of his life. He's I'm just going to start making films now. Showed off a reel, got a deal. Unbelievable story. But he's the kind of guy that's like totally data driven on the other side of things. And we're like sitting there brainstorming. What are the buzzwords? What's the topics that people want to hear about? What is the film that's going to be the most sellable? And when Joker came out, because his film's called Mother, and it's like this, kind of thriller or whatever thing. But when Joker came out, apparently he saw that, he went, shit, I can't make this film anymore. Which is not true at all. Not true at all. You're your own director. You got your own thing going, right? Don't
Mhm.
don't even worry about that. But
I mean, look at how many remakes there are of everything. So,
absolutely,
I mean, why can't you?
what is Hollywood?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, seriously.
One of the things I've learned over the years is that if you think you're original, you just haven't seen all of them.
that's right.
You really should look at some German 20s films if you think you're being original.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter, just make stuff.
That's right.
Pick up a camera.
Oh, by
So-
the way, this is Phil. He's the co-founder of Filmocracy. So if you love the platform, it's really because of him.
Thanks. Yeah.
Well done.
Thank you. I'm just here to participate, though. I'm just listening in. So, because this is fun for me. I was never in film before, but let me tell you, in the last 5 months, I've become an expert.
You've definitely had. I think you've been given a crash course into filmmaking and the film world just by running these film festivals for the past 5 months.
I have fallen head over heels. I am madly in love with
Oh.
art. So let me tell you. Well, anyway, both sides of the story, guys. Serendipity or putting your heads together and brainstorming concept, whatever the case is, it's going to happen if it's going to happen. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, well, that's right. That's right. And it's always a mix. It's always a mix. Bringing it together, it falls apart, like Lucinda said. It changes so much. That's what's so fun, why we settled on documentary, because it is a really, really strange beast. And you really grab hold of the tail of it, and you never know where you're going to end up or who you're going to end up with. It's a really, it's a completely different animal from narrative filmmaking. It's just and you meet such incredible people doing it.
Strap in.
Yeah, with Doco. It just we've the experiences we've had, the people we've mixed with, is just astounding. I can't think of any other job where you'd be sitting, literally from everything. We've gone from I've been in small villages in India, sitting in a tiny little hut with no electricity, and then 3 weeks later be with the Governor General of Australia in his office, and you're just going from one to the other like that, mixing with the most incredible people all over the world. And so I think documentary is one of those things that I wish I'd have discovered a lot earlier, but I've discovered it now. So be careful what you wish for, Philip, now that you're in.
Wait for my directorial debut.
Philip's going to start making his own films.
Oh boy. All right, guys, I'm going to jump off here and let you get back to it. I got support tickets to handle.
That's a birthday.
That's
Thanks,
funny.
Phil. So does anybody have any other questions? Oh, wait, what were you saying, Lucinda?
I was going to ask Geordie what the documentary's about.
So we actually are doing a documentary on Tesla.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
So yeah, we and of all talking of serendipity, it came to us through a client who is relatively big in the financial services world, runs a advisory firm here in Los Angeles. It has about $1 billion under management. And we sat down to lunch one day. He's actually a very prolific Tesla bull. So he's on CNBC and all of the news programs. And before Tesla had this crazy run in the past 2 years, if you follow the stock, it's been meteoric. He was touting Tesla. And so he kind of came to me over lunch and said, I feel like you should do a documentary on this angle of it and the financials. And so that was kind of the premise where we started, which was, kind of exploring, in particular, the huge short position. So there are basically a lot of short sellers that were hedging against Tesla in the billions of dollars. So in 2019, it was the largest short position on the planet. So there were people that were vested in making this company fail and profiting from it.
Wow.
So that was kind of the starting point, and it's to the point of rabbit holes. It's been interesting because actually this past Monday, I was in San Francisco, and we were filming with a former Tesla head of engineering. He was like employee number 12.
Oh, wow.
And we were filming the CEO of a prominent lithium-ion battery company. So we've already gone down the rabbit hole, but it's been an interesting journey. So we're documentary babies over here. We're starting to get to know your guys' world.
That's fantastic.
I can't wait to see it.
That'll be a great
so
story.
is this, you guys are actually making it right now? Like, you guys have funding for it and stuff?
We're self-funding it so far. Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Well, that's the cool thing about documentaries too, right? It's like you just kind of have your camera and you just kind of film it and you kind of see how it comes together, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think, I'm sure you guys would comment on this too. There's a lot of ways to make documentaries really expensive, but fortunately, you can control costs. I think it's a little bit easier to control costs than with narrative. I mean, narrative, it's depending on what your concept is, it blows out of the water in a second. So like if you have a bunch of locations with narrative, then you're done. There's no way you're going to make a cheap version of whatever you're doing, because you need locations and location fees and crew. But documentaries, I think you can kind of consolidate it a little bit. Still hard, but I think you're right. Like, you have a little bit more control over it all.
Oh, wow. So this is probably going to come out sooner than the feature version of Founder.
We'll make it a race. Maybe it's an internal race at my company. See which project we can do first.
Which project is going to screen at our festival next year?
Yeah,
Let's
exactly.
find out.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh, that's so exciting. That's awesome. That's the thing. I love hearing about filmmakers who just kind of, they just do it. They just go and make the next project. It's like, I love that. And again, it's like, I feel like the more you create, the better you get. You learn so much from a project, whether it's actually, in production, or whether it's post-production, whether it's like trying to get it distributed, going through film festivals and meeting other people. It's like, you just learn so much. So yeah, I just think that it's in everyone's best interest to just keep creating.
Yeah, well, we were discussing the other day, not many people mention it, but filmmaking, documentary included, involves every creative art form. And that's what's so amazing about it, because you mix with all these incredibly different creative people, down to the people that are doing tech and the technicians themselves, focus pullers and grips are just amazingly talented. And everybody on the whole set in a narrative film is so talented and capable and creative. And then from music to lighting to the script writers to nothing else is like it. Production design, and production design is just such a remarkable job. And the designers and that, when you think about it, architecture, everything you can think of happens in a film, and there isn't anything else like that. And that's why it can both go incredibly well and incredibly dangerously wrong when you get long groups together, or it's chaos at the same, sort of like controlled chaos. But what a wonderful game it is to play, I think.
Great. Well, I had so much fun having a conversation with you both, with the three of you. And thank you so much for our audience for being interactive and asking questions. And thank you, Phil, for jumping in and joining us. It was so much fun to have you here. The session is being recorded. So when the festival is over, I'm going to send everybody out the links to the recordings that you all can watch in your own time, and you can cut and splice and do whatever it is you want with these recordings. But yeah, thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you around at the festival. Please come to the other Q&As, because the Q&As are really my favorite part, just because I love getting to know the filmmakers and, you know, the thought process behind their films, and, you know, hearing them talk about their future films. That's the best. So thank you everybody so much, and have a wonderful evening.
You too. Thanks.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Christina.
thanks, Christina. Appreciate it.